Welcome to or welcome back to World History Workbook or Teaching World History using the World History Workbook. This is the installment on languages. We're still talking about universals, and pages 59 through 76 look at languages, and we'll look at all of those pages in this discussion. So it's a 10-minute talk that'll probably run 20 minutes. Project 14, 13, and the 12s will all be included in this. One important thing to remember about languages is that languages are universal in the sense that we've already discussed in the previous installment, and that is that all people have languages, and at birth all people have the ability to learn the physiological ability to learn any language. But then as people get older and don't utilize these particular abilities, they lose that ability. And so as people get older, it becomes impossible to articulate certain particular sounds from languages which they never learned. And all languages descend from a single language or a single group of languages spoken in Africa by our ancestors 50, 60, 70, and 100,000 years ago. Since that time, language has changed, and we can see in our own lifetime that language changes, and in some cases language changes quite rapidly. I mean, within a lifetime. I don't understand some of the language features and vocabulary and styles of my own children. So even in that span, language has changed that much. I think children could construct an entire conversation that their grandparents couldn't understand. And this is because of changes in technology, more than pronunciation, vocabulary, slang, and also the fluidity of modern American society. That there are terms and ideas that are moving very quickly through the culture. So certainly over 50,000 years, let's just say 50,000, language has changed a lot. And yet there are some core words that have been retained over that time. They would be very basic words and words that would represent things that all people have always had, like I and milk and water and breast and one and finger and two and moon. I mean, there are some words that really resist change over extremely long periods of time, thousands of years. Words retain the same shape, if not exactly the same sound, and so on. We refer to the mother language, to all languages, as first language. Obviously, we don't know what people called it at the time, and it's not exactly the first language, but there's a utility to identifying a first language as first language, and so we'll do that. Relationships between modern languages or between sets of languages since first language are helpful when we can establish sort of what is the relationship between languages. So the relationship between English and Japanese, it's helpful when we can to understand something about the two cultures, the circumstances under which they met and encountered and exchanged and so on. It helps to reconstruct the story of those two people and the story of humanity when we can reconstruct the relationship between the languages. It will show the timing of meetings and so on. One way that linguists use to reconstruct or to establish relationships between languages is by looking at the relationships between particular words. So are there words that are shared between two languages? And if so, how did that happen, that those words were shared? And we use the comparative method, which is a very basic method of comparing common elements in disparate sets, in different sets. So the sets are languages and the common elements are words. So The word Buta in German is the same as the word butter in English. It sounds slightly different, but it's effectively the same. It has the same shape. In fact, it has the same spelling, although spelling is a more recent development, and so spelling can vary when sounds can stay the same, and spelling is really a different kind of a different category of language. But there are three possible explanations for why butter and Buta are the same word effectively in German and in English, which are different languages and not immediately comprehensible one to the other. One possible explanation is that there's no explanation, that it's just an accident. It's just a complete random accident. And in the comparative method, that's an important element. If you were using the comparative method to compare two isolated cancers in a single person's body, what is the relationship between those? If it were an accident, it would mean there's no relation between them at all. And that would be important for the oncologist to know. With the linguist, it's the same thing. Is it possible that butter and Buta in English and in German have no relationship? There's no relation between them, and so it's just a pure accident. And the answer is no, it's not really possible. I mean, I suppose it's very remotely possible, but such a minor chance that we simply say no. But we still ask it, is it possible that it's an accident? And the answer is no, it's not possible. The other two are that are borrowing and common descent. Borrowing means that people usually had the item or the thing or the activity, and they lent that activity to the other people who then took the word with it. This is very, very common, that words are borrowed from one language to another. The word okra in English is borrowed from people who came from West Africa. They brought okra with them, and along with okra they brought the word okra. And so when people in Louisiana and Mississippi and so on got this new, what is okra, a vegetable? Got this new vegetable, they said, well, oh, that's awful. What is it? And the answer is, it's okra. Okay, so they adopted the word, and they made it into an English word, an American English word. They may have adopted the word and then sort of modified the pronunciation somewhat, and then gave it a spelling, and then the spelling varied, and so on. But the word came with the thing. So the question then would be, what are the chances that the word butter was transmitted from either German into English or English into German along with the item? And the answer is the chances are not very good, because butter is much older than that. English and German have a single common, have a most recent common ancestor, and butter predates the most recent common ancestor to German and English. And so the third possible explanation is that there's common descent, which means that there was a parent language to both of those languages, and all languages have common ancestors, and so all languages have most recent common ancestor, and there was a parent language to German and to English, at least Indo-European or Proto-Indo-European, if not something since Proto-Indo-European, some larger language group, more recent language family that had the word butter, or Buta, or one of these forms of this word, and that word then was retained in the German and in the English as those languages evolved, and those languages became the modern languages, and that's what happened. Butter is an old word. It's an old Indo-European word, and it was just retained from the time that it was spoken in Indo-European right up until the present. And that was true of the people speaking languages that evolved into modern German, and people speaking languages that evolved into modern English. Common words shared by common ancestry is also quite common. So that's the comparative method. And there are examples of borrowing in the reading. borrowing words from Japanese on page 60, examples of how language changes. And then the projects, Project 12, A, B, and C, use this chart that you see on page 65 and another one on the following pages. The chart, some of the instances of these three words in some Indo-European languages. Be clear, these charts are not complete. If you had a complete chart of every Indo-European language, including dialects, but what is dialect but a language without an army, that these charts would be giant. They would be enormous. So this is a very simplified, and it's not the most important languages. It's just languages that show a breadth of Indo-European languages and geographic and cultural breadth, and also some of the languages. Obviously, English is in there, and then languages that are closely related to English because the class is being taught in English, and of course, a lot of people will also be familiar with French and Spanish in these world history classes in the United States, and so those are also included on here. But there should not really be any political choice. It's just a set of languages, of prominent languages of Indo-European. A couple of them are extinct. Sanskrit, although Sanskrit is, there are some people who speak, some few thousand people who speak Sanskrit as a first language. It's basically a sacred language, no longer living, but still studied, like Latin. So the questions on Project 12A, page 63, are based on these charts, and the charts that show the descent of the word mead, or the words for mead, from Indo-European into these modern languages. So is it possible the modern English word mead descended from modern German word met for mead? And it's just the exercise is for students to look at the chart and to look at horizontal relationships, which are all on the chart, which are all cousins. All languages are cousins. And then vertical relationships, which are descent and ancestry. And of course the answer is no. It's not possible for a word to descend from a cousin into another cousin. Is it possible the English word mead descended from the Proto-Indo-European word medu? In fact, it not only is possible, that's what happened. Is it possible the English word mead descended from the Sanskrit word? That is also not possible. And what I do with these is I have students write these out in complete sentences, and I give them a minimum word count. I believe in this case it was 35 words. And the purpose of that is to get them to articulate, to create in their own minds, and then to write into paper something that explains the formula, something that explains the relationship, and simply uses these terms. Not the word mead is that's so important, but the words of genealogy. So descent and relationship and cousin and parent language and those kinds of terms. Does the English word Danish word I can't pronounce it, but mørt, share a common ancestor with the German word met? Of course, it shares a common ancestor. These are common by shared descent or common descent, which is the same thing. Is it more likely the 8 words identified as mead are similar because of accident borrowing a common ancestry? They are all by common ancestry. So the charts are, again, it's a project that's very simple, and yet there's behind the simple project is a much larger question about the relationships between languages. And so the projects are simply an opportunity for students to use these terms on their own, and to create sentences and create arguments, and to think about the meanings of these words and to use those words, and then possibly, hopefully, to have a discussion about them. But if they're not able to have a discussion because this is taught remotely, that's also fine. I mean, then they still are using the words, they still are experimenting with how they can be defined. Project 13 is very simple, borrowing words. and adapting the comparative method, these words could not have descended into modern English from Indo-European if Indo-Europeans didn't have those things. And so with those, I don't ask for complete sentences. I have not, at least. Of course, you can do what you like. I would always support asking students to write out incomplete sentences. I think when you articulate a complete sentence, then you have constructed this term into a larger definition and given it some context, and that's a way of learning. So the story of English 73 it's a nice summary of how English formed, and I think it's important to recognize that English, like all languages, is really a mix of so many languages. It didn't descend discretely any more than I descended discretely or you descended discretely. The language is a mix, and it continues to be fluid and continues to change, and it's living. Language is living, and it's changing, and it's dynamic, and it's inclusive. Language is a beautiful human activity, and it shows our complexity and also our interconnectedness. Project 14, Inherited Culture. This is helpful, I think, to show that English is, in American English, that there is no such thing as pure English and perfect English, that in everyday life we use all kinds of words from different languages. So it's kind of a fun exercise, and it's an exercise that is designed to reinforce the principle that language is universal. And not only is language universal, but in a certain way, in the same way that we're different persons, but we're the one people, humanity. Language is the same way. I mean, we're all speaking the same language in a sense, although different languages within one larger human language. I think that about covers it. If you have any questions, send me an email. I'll see you next time.